during the years immediately after the war, I think it would be fair to say that one could hope that South Africa would become a more liberal society. A lot of our young men had gone into the army as volunteers. They'd fought in the North African campaigns, they'd fought in Italy, some of them had fought here in Britain against the Nazis. Many of them had become prisoners of war of the Nazis. So when these guys came back, one thought that they would perhaps imbue the country with a new spirit. So it was a great shock when in 1948 the National Party, which was dedicated really to racism, came into power. They didn't actually secure the majority of votes in the country, but because of the peculiarities of the voting system, they became the official government. And there was a shock wave right through the sort of liberal-minded community, because we were now really in the grip of a group of people who were declared racists. They were not only racists when it came to black people, but they were openly anti-Semitic. And yeah, it was quite depressing. So for a time, it seemed as though it would be wise to get out of the country. And
did you consider that at that time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yes, I did. For a while, I flirted with the idea of going to Israel, but I stayed. I was as I said, in my father's business, and I couldn't get out of that.
And your father was ill at the time?
My father became ill. He had cancer. I got married in the early 50s, and we had a family. Again, we thought seriously of emigrating. But in the 60s, when I started doing serious photography, and particularly began to work on the essay about Afrikaners, I realized that I had a sense of involvement in this society, in South African society, that meant a great deal to me. And that however uncomfortable it might become, I wanted to stay there. I came back to South Africa with a gradually mounting understanding that if I was talking to anybody, I had to talk to South Africans, because they understood my language. There was no way that I could communicate without enormously complex explanations to people in other parts of the world, because they just didn't have the beginnings of an understanding of what we were about. And my photographs were not of the obvious kind that they expected to see in newspapers. Almost from the beginning of when I became seriously interested in looking critically at South African society, I did photograph structures. I did an early series on what I call the houses of God, where I photographed places of worship in the early 60s. And they excited me. I think there was something about them that I really enjoyed. And that recurred over the years. But then in '83, I had an exhibition in Cape Town, a 35-year sort of retrospective. And I took a few days holiday afterwards and spent the time in those few days photographing a little town near Cape Town that had been, or that was, a very popular holiday resort among Afrikaners. And I realized that there was an enormously close link between my understanding of Afrikaners and the ways that they expressed themselves in these structures. Hotels, boarding houses, cafes, and so on. There was something very intimately connected between the people that I knew and their structures. And so I decided, at first I was simply going to photograph places of worship, but then it rapidly changed. I decided quite deliberately that I was going to go out and photograph South African structures as expressions of value, of our values, of our ethos. And I bought a camper deliberately, because I worked out that if I really did this project, it would cost me a huge amount of money in hotels, and I hate the idea of staying in hotels anyway. So I bought a camper so that I could travel South Africa photographing structures, which I did then off and on over a period of 10 years. So I took a drive. It was Good Friday, 1998. I took a drive through Johannesburg. Excuse me. And I was appalled at what I saw, because the city itself had become a wasteland. It was like a bombed-out city. And when I went into the north, there were these appalling structures that were arising like things out of the earth. It was still before the casino, but it was in that mode. And I came home and I said to my wife, for the first time in my whole life, I feel that I don't want to live here in this city. I have no relationship to it. I don't understand what's happening in the city. I'm appalled by it. I'm equally appalled by what's happening in the north. I have no sense of belonging in this place. After a little while, I began to photograph what was happening, and I began to get a deeper understanding, if you like, and a more sympathetic understanding.